I'm going to do a spoken word piece called Truth or Dare. It's actually a defense of the resurrection story. The Bible says, if he did not resurrect, then we are among men the most hopeless. So this is a defense, a synopsis of a defense of the resurrection story. It goes like this. Coming through the gates of AD 33, there was a challenge to truth. A beef that, if proven true, would decimate the entire Christian crew. The issues bothered on the missing body and the empty tomb. It was so dire, laughter will accompany a belief in the resurrection too. See, the world was ready to ravish this resurrection story to a tale of fools. Then modernity followed with warrant for faith to step aside to move. Ignorance was paper awarded to the man of faith. There were battles of black and blue, just to ascertain the basis for belief in the truth. So, like in court, empty tomb was asked to stand in the booth. The first prosecutor was called to cross-examine the issues. His name was Mr. Swoon. Mr. Swoon came up with issues and he said, listen to his voice. Skeptics are sure to prove that this so-called Christ was in a swoon. Swoon added, this Jesus did not actually die. He was alive all the while, and the reason for the empty tomb is simply because he stepped out of his swoon. Nice and sweet, he added. This destroys the salvation story. This destroys the incarnation mystery. This totally debilitates the tenets of soteriology and puts down evangelical Christology. So, he turned to empty tomb. What can you say to these? Empty tomb. The defendant walked up to the microphone and spoke. With a heavy heart and absolute conviction, he said, you see, in fact, he cleared his throat. And then he said, you see, when Christ died on the tree, when he hanged, when he cried, Eli, Eli, he actually died. See, pierced on the side, water and blood gushed out, proving the absence of life. See, the lungs in that holy body ruptured, producing water and blood as a sign. See, how will a swoon man who was beaten and battered roll away a stone with which he was confined and come out of the tomb fresh and refined? You tell me how. The judge began to see tensions rising in the courtroom, so he was looking for a recession. But then the conspiracy theorists interrupted court session. They came with questions to compromise the disciples' story. They graded them on the basis of bias and their history. They tagged them liars perpetuating the Easter story. They said, you know, these guys are holding up a lie. Listen to their voice. The Roman soldiers clearly testify that the body was stolen, so this resurrection crap is a blatant lie. Empty tomb got up this time in tears. And he said, how do we explain the 10 died martyrs without compromising their testimony? You see, the resurrection to the disciples was not belief, it was a fact. A historical occurrence that obliterated their unbelief. In fact, how would 10 weak men overpower Roman military? See, the fact is that these guys preached Christ in his most glorified anatomy. Preached Christ risen from the dead, though it challenged all natural theology. Preached Christ to the death without compromising their testimony. What can you say to these? Now the tensions were high, so judge called for a recession. I hope you're following. I hope you're following. In the fullness of time, court was back in session. Mr. Hallucination was the first to make the case. He came out with questions to question the disciples' mental state. He said to empty tomb, you see, your folks, listen to his voice, your folks actually saw Jesus resurrected because of their mental state. They went through a little temporal insanity. He added, in essence, I submit to this court that they possess a twisted psychology, and so a simple hallucination will be ultimate doxology. Empty tomb giggled and laughed as he stepped to the mic. He said, you know, I agreed with your hallucination story till Thomas touched this Jesus. Till the disciples ate with this Jesus. I mean, they ate. till 1 Corinthians 15 verse 1 to 18. Groups 12 and as many as 500 saw him simultaneously in the flesh, not just as an act of faith. Hallucination could not stand the debate, so the force of his heresy had to deflate. Now the prosecutor was growing helpless. So he decided to compromise the eternal story as a myth. See, he picked Jesus, put him side by side with Horus, with Buddha, with Mithra, with Osiris, demythologizing the Bible till it was a book with no power, with no miracles, with no resurrection, just a book for ethics this time. Empty tomb, God up, interjected court session with proof. And he said, you see, stop perpetuating sad falsity. The Gospels present eyewitness testimony. The resurrection of Christ was preached in Jerusalem, where Jesus lived and died just after he lived and died. How do you explain a myth in the lifetime of those who lived with the Christ, yet saw him live and died and still hold on that the resurrection was no lie? He added, you see, if Jesus did not resurrect from the grave, the simple proof was to pull up his corpse. But we all know that never happened. You see, the only case that pans out historically, that pans out philosophically and spiritually, knowing that the tomb was empty, knowing that the church grew plenty, knowing that the disciples died without compromising their story, is that Jesus Christ died and rose from the grave. See, he holds all power and he still seeks to save. The truth is that Jesus died and was buried in the grave and resurrected, period. It's truth, or I dare you to come up with something better, period.